Hello, Sublation Media viewers and readers. I had originally planned to release this video for patrons only and to release a different video about Chris Cutrone and the defeat of the social democratic left to the public. But given what's been happening today, which is Friday, around the Twitter files, I'm going to reverse that decision, and I'll be releasing the video about Cutrone to patrons in the next few days, and then making that video public next weekend. Today, I'll be releasing this video about the Twitter files and the security state.
Do we live in what the philosopher Gilles Deleuze calls a control society? Is the networked nature of the contemporary media a characteristic feature of societies of control? Or does the current loss of faith in capitalist neoliberalism signal the societies of control are now, in fact, in process?
Around 2 years ago, journalist Matt Taibbi, now notorious co-author of the Twitter files, along with Barry Weiss, Michael Schellenberg, and Li Fang, and of course, Elon Musk in the background, turned his attention to critical theory. He wrote an essay entitled Marcuse, Cult of the Pseudo-Intellectual.
So you would have in the human organism two primary drives: erotic energy, life instincts, and destructive energy, death instinct.
In his typical gonzo style, Taibbi wrote, "Reading Marcuse is like eating a bowl of thumbtacks." But while Taibbi was certainly right about how some of Marcuse's failures were taken up by the New Left, the notion of repressive tolerance, for example, he might well want to reread One-Dimensional Man if he can find the time. After all, what Marcuse was grappling with in that book was how advanced industrial societies had negated the values and ideals that spurred on the world revolution that founded those industrial societies. Marcuse was, at its core, attempting to hold on to the very ambitions and values that define Taibbi as a journalist. For example, Marcuse wrote in his conclusion to One-Dimensional Man the following paragraph: "Self-determination will be real to the extent to which the masses have been dissolved into individuals liberated from all propaganda, indoctrination, and manipulation, capable of knowing and comprehending the facts and of evaluating the alternatives. In other words, society would be rational and free to the extent to which it is organized, sustained, and reproduced by an essentially new historical subject. At the present stage of development of the advanced industrial societies, the material as well as the cultural system denies this exigency." If we put aside the question of an affluent society and Marcuse's horror at the sight of a Big Mac, this is what Marxists of all stripes share with the Gen X journalist Taibbi: a commitment to the idea of individual freedom and reason. It is in the service to that ideal, and in an effort to help speed along the process of overcoming the cultural and material system that denies the exigency of a new historical subjectivity, that I'm making this addendum to the Critical Cuts video, How Trump Replaced the Left. Let's start with this Mehdi Hasan interview.
Matt, let's talk factual inaccuracies. Stanford, you talk a lot about the Election Integrity Project in the Twitter files, which Stanford and the University of Washington founded to monitor attacks on our elections. And you say some stuff about them that a lot of your critics say is not true, and that affects your credibility. You said the EIP was founded in response to the government dropping its proposal for a disinformation governance. Well, there you are. We're quoting you on screen. It wasn't. It was formed 2 years earlier. You suggest it was government funded, even though during the 2020 election that you're covering, it wasn't. You say they labeled 22 million tweets as misinformation in the run-up to the 2020 vote. They didn't. They flagged 3,000 election misinformation tweets for labeling, so you were only 21,997,000 off. And you also claim the EIP was... let me finish the question. You can come back in. You also claim the EIP was partnered with the government Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, CISA, to censor Twitter. But you mix up CISA, CISA, a Homeland Security Agency, with the Center for Internet Security, the CIS, which is a non-profit. In fact, you added an A to CIS. I think people can see it there in brackets to make that false claim. It's just error after error, Matt, on just this one topic.
An error. But the other ones aren't.
No,
22 million number came from their own report.
Yeah, where did it came from a report in March. Do you know what the 22 million number is, Matt? Can you tell me? Because we checked. 22 million is the number of tweets about election misinformation that they just mapped. How many tweets were they? The ones they actually flagged to Twitter before the election, 22 million came after the election. It wasn't in the run-up. They flagged 3,000. So you were off by 21,997,000. It's another error.
They've said a lot of things. I stand by my story.
The errors that Mehdi confronted Taibbi with were not substantial errors, when they were errors at all. For example, Mehdi's objection was that it was the CIS, not the CISA, that the EIP was in partnership with. But the EIP website reads, EIP partnered with the CISA in 2020. Both to help them understand rumors and disinformation around the 2020 election, and so that the CISA could provide corrective and/or clarifying information from election officials. Mehdi is doing the Department of Homeland Security a service here as he muddies the water, obscuring the connections between the entities. After all, what good is a cutout organization if it is known to be tied to your security agency? Better to leave that hidden in plain sight. Regarding the 22 million tweets, this one is a bit more thorny. Alex Stamos from the EIP tweeted out the full report that Matt Taibbi used as his source. Having read it, I can tell you that while it's true that the EIP didn't make a request to take down 22 million tweets, they did capture 22 million tweets that they labeled as misinformation. Rather than ask for the tweets to be taken down, they analyzed them in order to track the source of the misinformation to spreader accounts. The report, when read in full, is really frightening for people who care about free speech because it proposes institutionalizing relationships with social media companies and training social media personnel in advance of upcoming, quote, disinformation events. That is, meeting regularly with social media companies to help them set up terms of service that will coincide with the needs of the state. I think the reason Taibbi fared poorly in this exchange with Mehdi Hasan is that he hasn't yet fully taken in the implications of his reporting. Mehdi Hasan isn't merely a journalist who has lost his way. MSNBC isn't merely a big corporation seeking to make a profit by providing its liberal audiences with stories that confirm their worldview. Rather, MSNBC is also partnered with the Department of Homeland Security and other government agencies. Referring again to the report that Stamos tweeted out this morning, April 7th, 2023, a report entitled The Long Fuse, Misinformation in the 2020 Election, in the section entitled Responses, Mitigations, and Future Work, the EIP states the following about traditional media outlets like MSNBC. The following recommendations are for journalists and media professionals covering election-related misinformation. 1. Prepare journalists to encounter misinformation. This training should include accepted definitions, attribution standards, how to avoid inadvertent amplification, and more. 2. Coordinate reporting across beats and newsrooms. Election reporting relies on a combination of campaign embeds, White House and congressional reports, technology reporters, and others. Organizations should handle misinformation uniformly and professionally. And 3. Anticipate misinformation and establish guidelines for combating it.
If you look at the language that was used in this war against disinformation from the very beginning by the agencies that were leading it, like the State Department's Global Engagement Center and later by Department of Homeland Security. And in fact, this is the language used in the Democratic National Committee's, I believe it's the 2020 platform. But the bottom line is they refer to a whole of society effort. And what they mean when they talk about this whole of society effort is that they're yoking together both the federal agencies, Silicon Valley tech platforms, Wall Street funders, and the universities and the press. So the hegemony is not conspiratorial. It's not particularly, or it's not far-fetched at all. Actually, it's the way they describe it. It was their aim, and they achieved it.
The way to understand all these facts, to interpret them, is, I think, best provided by Jacob Siegel. In his essay, he concludes this way. To a ruling class that had already grown tired of democracy's demand that freedom be granted to its subjects, disinformation provided a regulatory framework to replace the U.S. Constitution. By aiming at the impossible, the elimination of all error and deviation from party orthodoxy, the ruling class ensures that it will always be able to point to a looming threat from extremists, a threat that justifies its own iron grip on power. I would just add that a left that has grown used to thinking about politics at a distance, to reading Marcuse or Foucault or Marx the way that it might read a novel, grown used to watching the news the way that a person might watch a detective show, is ill-prepared for this moment. A left as defeated as we all are now is perhaps at an even greater disadvantage than Taibbi was during his interview. We should take this seriously. The dystopian future from our favorite books and movies has arrived. Only the villains aren't all wearing black hats or dressed like demons. If we're not careful, we might find ourselves amongst their lot. We might find ourselves stuck, as the phrase goes, on the wrong side of history. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.